My name is Hannah Ward, and my project is a novella titled The Shoemaker. The Shoemaker is a retelling of the classic Cinderella story that pulls elements from fairy tales around the world and combines them with the modern concepts of feminism and the questioning of social structures. In my research for this project, I wanted to explore a structuralist approach to literature. Using this framework, I was able to identify a sort of formula that made up the general structure of fairy tale and folktale stories. With support from my mentor, Professor Jessie von Rheenen, and the Artist in Residence program at UNCG, I was able to research the basic structure of fairy tales around the world and, while drawing from my own experiences surrounding these tales, was able to identify a few common themes to structure my story around. The Shoemaker follows Amelia, a Cinderella-like character whose life has always been ordinary. She cares for her ailing father alone and throws herself into her work as a small-town shoemaker in the hope she'll soon be able to afford to travel and give her father the medical attention he needs. Amelia doesn't believe anything in her life will ever change until a mysterious stranger walks into her shop and offers her a deal she can't refuse. The terms are clear. Amelia must attend 3 balls being held in the royal court of Glisaria. But when Amelia's simple life as a shoemaker gets overturned, will Amelia become queen, or will she lose much more than just her shoes? My inspiration in this project was my own experience with fairy tales. As a child, I read lots of fairy tales, and these stories often contributed to how I saw myself. However, one common theme among these tales that I identified was the nature of the passive feminine protagonist. Female identifying characters in these tales are often not given much agency to create change in their lives and are instead forced to rely on miracles and magic provided by other characters. I felt like I identified with many of these protagonists, but it was disheartening to see how many of them relied on others to achieve their happily ever afters. This led me to the 2 most important components of my own twisted tale: an active protagonist and the removal of magic. Specifically, my protagonist Amelia has her own profession, and she is respected in this position within the world of the story. While Amelia begins as a more timid character who allows others to guide her life, the story deals with Amelia's personal journey as she begins to take her life into her own hands. My story also features a large female identifying cast of characters with their own ambitions and goals. Initially, my idea for this project was to develop a short novella based on my own fairy tale story. However, this project soon grew way beyond the scope of my initial proposal. While working with my mentor and the supporters of my project, I was able to go beyond the writing part of creating my novella into exploring aspects of publishing and design. Specifically, I was able to work on the aspects of creating my own printed version of my work. The first aspect of this that I worked on was cover design. As you can see here, I have a cover for my own work that was designed by myself. As covers are considered the best representation of a written work, I found it important to have my cover include motifs from my story. As you can see featured here, we have an antique shoemaker form, which represents my protagonist's profession. We also have a crown, which represents the fairy tale aspect of my story and the royal court that is featured. And lastly, we have the color green. The color green is important because this is the color that is used in my version of the glass slippers in my story. In addition to designing a cover, I was also able to explore aspects of bookbinding and typography. Specifically, I was able to explore the craft of hand binding a copy of my own book. The act of hand binding a book was very interesting to me because as I explored this process further, I realized that many of the tools used in bookbinding are actually the same or similar to the tools used in shoemaking. In a way, I got to explore a little bit of what my character does in her profession. In the future, I would like to pursue publishing representation for my work. I intend to continue developing my story while looking into other opportunities to get my work into the world. I think it's so important for young female identifying people to see a fantasy or fairy tale character that is active in creating change within their own world and life. My story defies fairy tale conventions in order to critique these components of the tales we tell younger generations, and to remind my readers that they can be the authors of their own happily ever afters. And now I would like to read an excerpt from my work. This is the scene that takes place as Amelia is preparing for the ball with the mysterious stranger, Garrett. Reaching behind the displays, he picked up a pair of shoes that were carefully hidden in the back. "What are these?" he asked. Garrett lifted a pair of sparkling emerald slippers. I rushed forward and snatched the shoes out of his hands, cradling them. "Nothing," I said. "I made these a few years ago, but they aren't anything we need." "They're perfect," Garrett argued. "They aren't even gold. Besides, they were an experiment, but they don't fit, not properly at least. The shoes use small pieces of stained glass to appear like they were cut from emeralds. Unfortunately, the glass made them stiff and they wouldn't mold to someone's feet in a way to fit properly. They were gorgeous, but not functional. Garrett took the shoes and knelt by my feet. He waited until I finally conceded and stuck out my foot for him to place them on. The shoes had been made for me, yet they were still a bit loose. I could walk, but that was likely it. No dancing, remember? Garrett said, and then we were off. Something you'll notice in this excerpt from my story is an aspect of fairy tales that I really tried to highlight. You'll notice that in my version of the glass slippers, these shoes are very gorgeous, but they are described as not functional. By describing my shoes in this way and sort of creating them in this format, I really wanted to highlight the limitations and the barriers that female characters face in many of these stories. So the barriers that my character face are actually represented in their version of glass slippers. Thank you all for listening to my presentation and supporting my journey in creating this project.